This is CNN and I'm Sophie interviewing Doug about Czechoslovakia. So here's my first question. What were some of the economic conditions before the communists took over?
Well, about 61.2% of the industrial labor force was nationalized.
And what were some of the political conditions before the communists took over?
Czechoslovakia, at that point in time, was the only Central European country to remain a parliamentary democracy from 1918 to 1938. And in 1945 to 1948, the Third Republic came into being. Its government was installed at Kosice on April 4th and moved to Prague in May. It basically was just a national front coalition in which three socialist parties, the KSC, Czechoslovak Social Democratic Party, and the Czech National Social Party, predominated. The Slovak Popular Party was banned because they were thought of being as collaborationists with the Nazis. Other conservative yet democratic parties, such as the Republican Party of Farmers and Peasants, were prevented from resuming activities in the post-war period. Certain acceptable non-socialist parties were included in the coalition, and among them were the Catholic People's Party, which was in Moravia, and the Slovak Democratic Party. In September of 1938, there was a cession of the Bohemian, Moravian, and Czech Sicilian border lands. The Sudetenland was where all Czech population was forcibly expelled, and on September 29th, the Munich Agreement was signed by Germany, Italy, and France, as well as Britain. The Czechoslovak government agreed to abide by this agreement, and this agreement basically said that Czechoslovakia must cede the Sudetenland territory to Germany. Benz resigned as president of the Czechoslovak Republic on October 5th, 1938, and he fled to London and was succeeded by Emil Hácha. In early November 1938, under the Vienna Award, which was a result of the Munich Agreement, Czechoslovakia was forced by Germany and Italy to secede northern Slovakia, which was one-third of their territory, to Hungary. The Czechs in the greatly weakened Czechoslovak Republic were forced to grant major concessions to the non-Czechs. And finally, the Executive Committee of the Slovak People's Party met at Žilina on October 5th, 1938, and with the acquiescence of all Slovak parties, accepted the Social Democrats to form an autonomous Slovak government under Joseph Tiso.
And what were some of the social problems faced by Czechoslovakia before the communists took over?
Well, the social problems faced by them were their ethnic minorities, the majority of which were concerned in the country's large German population, the Sudetenland. And the Sudeten Germans constituted of 3 to 3.5 million out of 14 million of the interwar states' population, and they were largely concentrated in the Bohemian and Moravian border regions, which was called the Sudetenland.
And who are some of the main leaders in the rise of communism?
Just to name a few, there was Clement Gottwald, which was a prime minister, Edvard Benn, and he was the leader of the Czechoslovak independence movement, Alexander Dubek, and he was a secretary of the Slovak Communist Party, Antonin Novotny, and he was the president of Czechoslovakia, and Alexander Dubek, and he was the party secretary, and finally Gustav Husak, which was Alexander Dubek's deputy.
And what's the rise of communism from above or below?
In the 1950s, the Stalinists accused their opponents of conspiracy against the People's Democratic Order and high treason in order to oust them from the positions of power. It was a revolution from above by the more powerful Stalinists, and the rise was from above, again, and it was due to the invasion of other countries.
Was there any role of outside forces?
In July of 1968, the Soviet leadership announced that it had evidence that the Federal Republic of Germany was planning an invasion of the Sudetenland and asked permission to send the Red Army to protect Czechoslovakia. Alexander Dubek, aware that the Soviet forces would be used to bring an end to the Prague Spring, declined the offer. On the 21st of August in 1968, the Czechoslovakia was invaded by members of the Warsaw Pact countries, and in order to avoid bloodshed, the Czech government ordered its armed forces not to resist the invasion. And Alexander Dubek and Ludwik Svoboda were taken to Moscow, and soon afterwards they announced that after free comradely discussion that Czechoslovakia would be abandoning its reform program.
What was the time frame of the seizure?
Well, the communist era, which was 1948 to 1989, fell apart when the communists got owned by the liberal parties were coming into play, and this prompted the country to undergo a second revolution, and instead the communist control over the Czech state.
Who were some of the people in power 10 years after the communist seizure of power?
Again, just to name a few, there was Ludwik Svoboda, which was the president of Czechoslovakia, Alexander Dubek, the party secretary, Gustav Husak, which was replaced by Dubek as the party secretary.
And what were some programs or policies used to maintain control?
The party approved the new economic model, which introduced free market elements into the economy. The KSC theses on December 1965 presented the party response to the call for political reform. The democratic centralism was redefined, placing a stronger emphasis on democracy.
And finally, what was the impact on the whole population?
Large-scale arrests of communists within an international background. Example, those with wartime connection with the West, veterans of the Spanish Civil War, Jews and Slovak bourgeois nationalists, were followed by show trials. The outcome of these trials, serving the communist propaganda, was often known in advance, and the penalties were extremely heavy, such as in the case of Milada Horakova, who was sentenced to death, together with Jan Buchal, Javis Kalandra, and Ulrich Pekel.
Thank you. This was the end of the interview. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Doug, for answering all the questions about Czechoslovakia. It was really interesting.
Oh, no problem, Sophie. Anytime. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Thank you for watching.
Okay.